floor is yours.
Thank you. This is my floor, apparently. Very good. Yes, I'm here to talk to you about how doubt builds trust. If you feel like you are on a team where you're able to say, I don't know, and that's the best way to open yourself up to learning and being vulnerable and having that trust with your team members, then get out of here, you don't need this. Let's see, I'm a person. This is me, I test software. I work at Nordic, which is in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. I'm American, as you can probably hear, I'm very sorry. I'm embedded on a team of developers. I'm also serving as Scrum Masters at the moment. What else do you need to know about me? Oh yes, I'm an introvert. I know that when people meet me, they find that hard to believe, but if I don't have enough time, quiet time by myself, then I go a little crazy. And I like to ask questions. I think that's fun. It certainly makes me better at my job. And this is a picture of me asking the question, can I fit through this doorway standing straight up? The answer is no. You are also a person. Oh, we're going to be looking at dogs today. Just imagine that you are the dog. Because you are a person, that makes you beautiful. But you are also fallible. You make mistakes, you forget things, you have biases. Some of the things that you forget or that you are biased about, you know about and can account for. And some of them you can't. One of the biases that we all have is that we judge others as less trustworthy than ourselves. Charles Feltman wrote about this in his book, The Thin Book of Trust, and we'll come back to that. But first I want to talk to you about doubt. Doubt is questioning or uncertainty, as opposed to confidence without any reason or support. James Bach defines software testing as questioning a product in order to evaluate it, and I could certainly talk to you, and I would love to talk to you after this, about asking questions of a product and figuring out if that is what it should do, and asking questions of your process and your team. I think it's really important to start from a frame of mind of saying, I don't know exactly what this does, and then discovering that. But today I'm going to focus on a place where I think it is harder to say that you don't know, and that is in an interview process. I've been on both sides of the interviewing table. I've been the person looking for a job, certainly. It's why I'm employed, not to brag. But I've also been the person interviewing candidates to decide whether they should join our team as a developer, as a product owner, mostly as a tester, is what I've been interviewing for. So I'm asking the question, what do they bring to the table? Do I think that they have the capacity to learn and do the work that we need them to? And do I trust them? And it's really hard to discover that in a half an hour or an hour setting, because that's the kind of thing that's proven over the course of time, right? I'm not good at judging that when I first meet someone. And usually this is the model that we think of when we think of trust. And certainly in an interview situation of the, like, do I trust them, do I not trust them? And when I'm talking about trust, I mean choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. So that can be small or it can be big, but I think you can imagine a time when you have trusted someone with something and discovered in entrusting them with that they did not fulfill your expectations. And so then probably you end up in the place on the bottom on the right here where you now distrust them. And that is when what is important to you is not safe with that person in that situation. So you might find yourself being less forgiving when things go wrong, or negotiating each transaction. Last week, I spilled an entire pint glass of water all over my colleague's desk. Luckily, it didn't hurt any of his computer equipment. It was very good luck. But we cleaned it up together. He came back from the kitchen for me because he realized I was still thirsty. That's why I'd gotten the pint glass in the first place, with an espresso cup full of water. And he's like, this is how much I trust you. And I was like, that's fair. I hear that. Yep. Legitimate. I think this is what we're told, and certainly the keynote yesterday afternoon got me thinking about this again, is that we are told to fake it till we make it. If we're in an interview situation and someone asks you, oh, so how much experience do you have with MySQL database? Of course you're going to say, oh, yes, I've done that before, right? Because like you've probably dealt with databases before, you probably know something about that. Maybe you did it a few years ago, but it's not top of mind. You forget exactly what you would have to install. You probably don't have it like on your machine right now, but it's much easier to say, yes, I know that, because you want the job. Something is at stake, and you don't want to be embarrassed, and you think that you know enough, and that you can pick it up once you show up, and that'll be fine. And we kept finding in interviewing candidates that they were doing this. They were giving us, they were like faking it till they made it. They were telling us yes to the things that we asked, and then when they joined our company, they didn't have the depth of skill that we were expecting. And so we wanted to try an experiment to try to solve this problem, because we were getting the wrong people joining our company. We wanted people who were hopeful and curious. We wanted people who could be generous and careful with their work, people who were less fearful and less resentful, and people who were not worried about conforming. We wanted people who didn't have a fixed mindset and think that there was only one way of doing things, but instead who could wonder and ask questions about things and who had more of a growth mindset. And we also wanted people who could be vulnerable instead of having a big ego. So we changed the way that we were interviewing. We started pair testing with them. And when I say pair testing, I don't mean, I think probably in this context, a better description would be watching and asking as someone test. I'm imagining, usually as we practice it at my job now, we do strong style pair testing, so that's whenever you want something to happen on the computer or the thing that you're exploring, you have to say it out loud. Ideally, you have the person who's not driving the mouse and the keyboard making the decisions and choosing where you're going to go next. But in this case, I would show the candidate this website. I would say here is, oh, this was in America, so I would say soccer, but I'll use football and soccer interchangeably. They're all sports balls, it's fine. So I would show them this website. Oh, it was developed by Jan Newman and Phil Quinn for a workshop about pairing, actually, and fixing bugs between developers and testers, but it's great. But yeah, I would hand over my machine to the candidate and say, you have, 20 minutes or so. This is a website that shows you some soccer scores, and you'll see like sometimes in the future, right, if the games haven't happened yet, they probably don't happen. Let's see what this website does, what it doesn't do. Just walk me through what you're thinking and the decisions you're making as you make them, because I can't read your mind, right? I'm sitting here and I'm watching you click, but I don't know why you're making that decision. And this really confounded some people. Some people would show up and be like, and want to ask a million questions about the documentation of, what did your product owner say it would do? Right, like, where can I read all the user stories? Can I look at your backlog? And I'm like, I hear you. Those are the kinds of things that I would want you to ask when you show up for the job. That is not the aim of this particular exercise. This particular exercise is looking at this piece of software, and I would like you to join me in that exploration right now. And still, for some people, that was too much. That wasn't a skill that they had. We were also interviewing people for junior tester roles, so they had no experience in testing before. And so for those people who got a little stuck and just sort of like deer in the headlights, what do I do now? Don't know how to touch a mouse or use a keyboard anymore. I would take the first step with them. So I would say, oh, I wonder what that next week button does. And see if the date changed, right? I would model the behavior I wanted them to exhibit so that they had a place to begin. And in this way, I was able to move from that binary, do I trust them, do I not trust them, to this model instead of 3 dimensions of trust. Logic, empathy, and authenticity. Frances Frey spoke about this in her TED Talk about building trust on teams, something like that. If you search some of those words, the internet will tell you where to find it. But yeah, I wanted to move from the gut feeling and having one thing go wrong and me completely discounting candidates to a model where I was gathering evidence of what skills does this person have? Are those skills that would be useful at this company? Even if it's not for the specific job description I'm interviewing for, maybe they have the kinds of things that would be useful for another role. right? So I want to, is this the kind of person we want on board at all? How can we discover the good things that we like about them as opposed to just removing them from the pile? So I'll dig into each of these 3 dimensions as relates to the football website. Let me get back. Okay, so let's start with authenticity. Authenticity is doing and saying what you mean, and it is not hiding who you are. So that means that you are being internally congruent. That is the picture and the vision that you have of yourself is the same inside, is the same one that you portray outwardly to the world. So certainly that's looking at someone's resume and then testing with them was one way to determine that. So I might say, I might see that they have a lot of, on their resume, experience testing front-end things, testing mobile things, testing responsive things. And then if I go and ask them, where do you think this data is coming from? I might expect them to say, I don't know where that data is coming from, right? Like the situation that I was in before, I didn't have to worry about that. That was someone else's domain. Ideally, they would say, it wasn't my domain, but I was still worrying about it. That was the best candidate. But certainly, authentic people and people with integrity didn't need to feel like they needed to make up an answer, right? They could hypothesize, they might have an idea, but they could start with, I don't know. That's not my expertise. Right? I wanted them to be clear about their depth of skill in the interview. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to say about being congruent was internal congruence with you and yourself and the other people. I was not the only person interviewing these candidates. So we were also discovering whether the candidates were externally congruent. And that would be treating me, the interviewer, the same way they would treat a different interviewer. So maybe someone who was older and not female. Yeah, we discovered some interesting things there. Anyway, moving on. Empathy. So, what do I want to say about this? Oh, Jerry Weinberg defined software testing? No, quality, yes. Quality is value to some person who matters. And so, as the candidates were testing the website and they found bugs or they found things that were weird, I wanted them to connect that to who that might bother, to how it would matter to them and who it might matter to. So if I say, or they notice, right, that, oh, it looks like fixture finder in the header here, there's an E missing, but then I see the E in the title bar of the browser, I see the E in the URL, which one is right, or like, why might that matter, right? They might say, oh, it's wrong. Like a bad candidate would say, oh, the E is right, it's in more places. A better candidate would say, I'm not sure which one is right. I don't have enough evidence based on this page to discover which one is the correct answer. I might go talk to the product owner. They probably know what the strong opinion, right, like have a strong opinion about what their product is named. Hopefully they've decided that and made a particular opinion. I'm working with a product owner now that is having trouble doing that, so that's good to drag them along if that's not something they're great at. Or they might say, let me go go find the user story where we bought the domain name and make sure that it has the E there, right? Like find evidence some other way. But I would want them to, connect what they discovered to, does this matter? And they might determine it doesn't matter, right? To say, this is a website for finding the soccer scores. I was able to find the team that I wanted. I could get the score. I don't care what it's called. And like my browser will save the URL. That's one way to argue that. That wouldn't be how I would argue it. This misspelling is driving me completely insane, but I think at least it's a logical argument. So I would also want the candidates to be able to argue logically, right? They don't need to have the right answer. They don't need to know how the thing works, but I want them to be able to articulate, articulate their expectations. So let's see, if I say to them, oh, what's that flag next to the American flag? Because Americans don't know flags or countries. What do you think happens when you click on that flag? A poor candidate might say, oh, I don't know, and either be stuck still or go not follow, as Alex said, down my like rabbit hole squirrel path there. Right, they might just ignore my suggestion because they don't realize this is a test, this is still an interview. A better candidate might click on the flag and say, oh, it looks like it turns these headers where it says home team and score and stuff to German. I might say, okay, yeah, that's an answer. But the best candidates would start by saying, well, I expect it to, they would say that explicitly, I would expect it to show the scores for the teams that are from Germany. And then they click on the flag and say, oh, no, it doesn't do that. It changes the headers to German words. Oh, I think it's German. I don't actually speak German. Let me go use Google Translate, change some of these words, make sure that it is German, and make sure that the words match and that it's a good translation. That is the kind of person I want to hire. That's the kind of person I want to work with because they're logical, they're authentic, they're empathetic, they understand how to use safety language and be specific. They're able to separate their observation from their inference, right? They're not saying, I know what that German flag is doing. They're saying, I saw it do this. Let me see if that's actually what it does. Let me see if my mental model of the software matches what is happening with what I'm able to discover. And the people that are able to separate that and make more explicit the tacit and invisible assumptions that they are believing, and make those explicit, invisible, the more that you're able to do that, the more that that is a person that I am able to trust, even in a short period of time, like an interview, right? Someone who is able to show their work, can get the team responsible for quality, they can get everyone on the same page, and they are not worried about being embarrassed, right? Because a lot of the story of your testing is the stuff that you didn't do, right? When we were looking at this website, we're not going to test every feature, we're not going to look into the source code, right? I want the person who can say, I didn't even try sorting or filtering on the columns. I saw that those were features, but I just didn't get there, right? I want them to be able to identify risks, even if it's not something they have time to test or they don't know how to test, because making that invisible work and things that you're worrying about and putting those risks back onto the team allows you to communicate better and discover what your software should and shouldn't do. So let me tell you a story about when I did that more and when I kept saying I don't know. I joined a team, a couple summers ago now? And it was a bunch of developers who weren't super involved with the testing for the products they'd been working on before. So my boss's boss, Martin, at the time asked me to start writing exploratory testing charters for the stories so that the developers could see how I'm spending my time, what's taking so long, what I'm discovering when I am testing, how I'm thinking about this systematically and not just clicking around, as Alex was talking about earlier as well. And then that would be able to help them. Ideally, they would then be able to look at those. We could go into a refinement session or a sprint planning session to say, okay, I see there are 7 charters on this. These look like they're going to take a long time. These are the most important ones. Let's move those up. And then if these 2 at the end fall off, maybe those aren't the riskiest things for us, right? That was the vision for writing these charters. So I wrote a few charters, I added them to the stories, a few weeks went by. The other thing that Martin had asked me to do was to send him a weekly report about how all the charter stuff was going. Just a few notes of like, here's what happened, here's some charters I wrote, here's what's up. So I wrote some charters, sent him the report. A few weeks went by, I hadn't heard back from Martin about this. So I messaged him directly to say, hey, here's a story. I sent him like the story with what I thought were the best charters, of course, because you don't send people your bad work. And I asked, is this what you had in mind? And he takes a look at them and says, no, these are more like test ideas. I want you to go read Explore It, the Elizabeth Hendrickson book about exploratory testing. I want you to watch this hour-and-a-half coaching session of a Skype call that I did with our team in Japan, along with Chris Blaine, one of the other managers who has more experience in exploratory testing and writing charters specifically. So if you could go do all of that homework and then try again, that would be great. And I was like, cool, yeah, I can do that. I just sent you my best work and you said it was, cool, yep, I can do that, cool. So it takes me a few weeks to find the time to somewhat at work, and then I gave up and did it at home. Watch the video, read the book, write some more charters, bring them to my team, right? Prioritize them again. And I sent him a different story and said, here's some more charters. Are these what you had in mind? And again, he was like, I'm not sure exactly. I'm actually not the expert in this. I'm not sure these are the best, but why don't you, me, and Chris, the other manager, get on a call and then we can talk about the charters and get you to a better place with them. And I was like, cool, yeah, let's just call a manager from across the country and show him what you just said is not my best work. That's fine, yep, cool, that's my dream scenario, yep. So scheduled this conference call, got on a conference call with Martin and Chris. We talked about how I would write something like, test this API with special characters in the body of the JSON response, right? And we moved from something more specific like that to discover what kinds of inputs create what kinds of errors, or like go investigate what error codes we're expecting from this API. Like go either read the documentation about the API that we built or the things that you might expect from an HTTP response. So we were able both to generalize the things more so that I wasn't so stuck in like the one thing that I wanted to do was just like, copy and paste weird characters into the thing, and think more holistically about what are we expecting, what kinds of problems could occur here. It opened my testing up, I think. And so I wrote some more charters, I sent them to Chris, and I said, this is the third try now, right? So I sent them to Chris and I said, Chris, here's some charters. Are these okay? And he was like, oh yeah, these are good. And I was like, yes, finally. So I sent them to Martin and I was like, Martin, here's some charters. Chris said they were good. And he's like, oh yeah, these are good. And I was like, yes, finally. So then Martin and Chris are in a meeting with managers talking about how to make all the quality and testing better and get the developers more involved. And another manager, Paul, sees these charters and he thinks they're great. So then I see Paul later and Paul's like, Elizabeth, you're the only person at this company that can write exploratory testing charters. And I was like, Paul, I didn't know how to write an exploratory testing charter, right? I started from a place where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Here's something I produced, and is this what you had in mind? I showed people who I trusted and who I knew that I could express doubt with. I showed them something that was bad. I delivered something, first of all. And I asked if that was what they needed. And I was in the kind of environment where I knew that I wouldn't be penalized or written off as a bad candidate, right, for showing them not my best work. I knew that it would instead open up an ongoing conversation and allow me to get better at what I was doing, make the product better, make sure that I wasn't going either too deep or too shallow in my testing, that I was able to prioritize risks with the team and get the developers more involved in what I was doing. And that was scary, right? These were not my dream scenarios, this whole process. But it allowed me to practice. It allowed me to not just say, oh, I'm not gonna write these charters, I don't care that Martin's not reading the report, but it allowed me to listen better, to be more vulnerable, to have that open dialogue, to get better and improve my testing. And those are the kinds of people that I was interviewing for, and the people who were able to express doubt and use safety language and be specific about the work were the kind of people that I can hire and I can trust. Thank you.
So, thank you. Questions? I was hoping we can do question assurance. Now we have a question. Good.
Hello. Great talk.
Thank you.
Thanks. As an introvert myself, I never met so many introverts as in testing. I was wondering, because in my experience, being authentic and trust people is a lot of work. And in some cases, trust and authenticity contradict each other. Do you think it's possible to achieve 100% authenticity on the job?
I think that's a better question for my colleagues to be like, do you think Elizabeth is hiding something from you? I want the answer to be yes. Oh, yeah, people hear the question because you had a mic, cool. I've certainly worked with people who I know that are not being authentic with me, and I can tell. And I think you're right that it's a lot of work, And it's the kind of work that you probably don't think about, but that stresses you out a lot, right? If you don't trust someone or you feel like someone's being inauthentic and that you discover that you can't trust them for that reason. I would encourage you to find the people who you can trust and who you do feel like you can be authentic with and continue to build those relationships. And I think that not every line at work is going to be exactly the people that are on your team or exactly the people that you report to. Report with also, I guess. But anyway, yeah, find the people who you do trust and work with them. Oh, anyone else an introvert? Raise your hand. Yeah, nice. Cool. We can all go hide in a corner and not talk to each other later.
I think some of the introverts are too introvert to say that they're introvert.
Yeah, not raising your hand, also an option there.
More questions? Yeah, we have.
Don't throw the mic, that's scary.
Hi, I want to ask you what criteria you set for you when you're choosing a new place for work. Like, what criteria you use to find a job that you know that most of the people you work will be authentic and allow you to make mistakes and so on?
Right. Yeah, how do I find the workplace? Right, because the focus of this was I'm the interviewer, how do I choose someone? So how do I find the right place? I think it's similar things, right? I'm looking for them. Wait, let me go back to the triangle. Please hold. Please stand by. Then you can take a picture too. Right, if someone says something illogical, or I go in and they're complaining about their team members and they don't seem to understand where the other people are coming from, right? I've certainly been in interviews where the people are like, customer service, they're always bothering us. Right, and I'm like, but why aren't you listening to your customers? Like maybe they're bothering you because you're not listening to them. Yeah, certainly if I turn an interview into me being their therapist, that's a warning sign for me. And then, yeah, I've certainly had more trouble deciding if someone's authentic, right? Because you don't know them that well. Yeah, even just comparing, right, like the job description or what one person says is going to be the team that you're on or how many hours people work per day. There are a couple of things that I do like to ask of how do you decide when to leave work at the end of the day, right? For me, it's very much like, oh, my watch says it's time to leave work. And not all of my colleagues are already gone or all the people that I report to are done talking to me, right? I will put conversations off to the next day. And another question I like to ask in interviews of the people that I'm looking to join is what's something you don't like about working here? And the people who are like, oh, I can't think of anything. I just love working here. It's perfect. I don't trust those people. They don't like something. They're just not telling me. And often the people who are able to answer that question better think of something small, right? Of like, you know, like we're moving from like Jenkins to a different build server, and so our test environment's a little slow right now, but like we're almost done. It'll, you know, like that impedes my daily work, but we have a plan and we're moving forward, right? That's someone who I believe, first of all. And it sounds like by the time I get there, it's not going to be as big a problem. The fact that they worry about how their test environments are going and that that's something that's valued at the company, that sounds like some place where I can work. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I have any like killer other interview questions, but those are a couple to get you started.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Estonians are pretty much known for their how should I put it? Well, we're very direct. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So where do you draw the line between like, therefore I think Estonians are also authentic. Mm. So if something comes out, it's usually true. And it's on the borderline of being rude to many other cultures. So where do you draw the line between, you know, between authenticity and like being over the limit?
Right.
So being rude almost. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was living in America until about a year ago. At one point in New York, because that's the rudest place there, so I was able to survive. But for a period of time, I worked at an advertising agency, so like no one was telling you, like their job was to be able to lie to you well. In my opinion, I don't think that's how they would have described it, but I think that was the least authentic group of people I'd ever worked with, was people who were always spinning things, putting things in a better light. And I'm like, I'm here to shine a light on the things that you don't want to talk about. And so I think that that is one of the reasons, certainly that I didn't end up in Britain, that I ended up in the Netherlands next, was that they had the same reputation of being honest, and I think they would say straightforward, and I think it comes across as people who are not accustomed to it as rude. And there were certainly times when I first started when I would show people my bad work and they laughed in my face, and that was not a way that I was used to receiving feedback. Yeah, I would say adjusting to that and being, the amount that you can take a little step and be aware of what someone's reaction is, and then feel like you can give them more feedback and go deeper. I think that's probably the way to address that, and make sure, right, if you discover that you have different lines for what is comfortable, the way to discover that is to approach them slowly. That's what I would encourage you to do.
So we have time for a question or two. Anyone up?
Or just more tea,
that's
fine.
Okay, then we'll use the time for a little break, but some authentic Estonian goodies. Thank you so much for coming.
Brilliant, thank you.